for an interview. Uh-oh, we just... Okay, we're back. Um, just before we start, how much time do you have roughly? So I just have an idea of how to keep it.
Let's say 5 minutes.
35 minutes?
45 minutes.
45 minutes? Okay, great. That's excellent. As you know, we've been at the Canary doing some articles about the whole smear campaign against Jeremy Corbyn. My first question is, what do you think is the main motivation behind the smear campaign? Discrediting Jeremy Corbyn or defending Israeli policies?
Well, it's unusual, this particular campaign, because this has a long history. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. Already beginning in the mid-1970s, there began periodic campaigns titled The New Anti-Semitism. In fact, if you were interested, I can even walk over to my bookshelf and show you not only how many volumes have been written on the topic or devoted to the topic, but the fact that they're dispersed over a period of time. So it begins in the mid-1970s. Then there's a new campaign in the early 1980s. Then there's a new campaign beginning in the late 1990s, 2000. And then it became almost uninterrupted, the campaigns, they're no longer continual, but it becomes continuous because Israel's public relations image was going south, and they were desperate, Israel supporters, to find a way to intimidate the media and intimidate critics. Originally, beginning in the 70s, I said, there were particular periods where Israel's PR was plummeting, and then they would launch the campaign. Now it's almost nonstop. Israel has lost the battle for public opinion. And once you lose the battle for public opinion, then you have to start making resort to other kinds of tactics in order to stifle public opinion. You're not going to win in an open debate anymore if you're defending Israel's side. Israel is a alt-right, it's not an alt-right state, that's incorrect. Israel is an alt-right country, which is very different. In most countries with an alt-right, there's also a kind of alt-left. So there's a Bolsonaro in Brazil, but there is a Workers' Party in Brazil, and so on down the line. We have a Trump in the United States, alt-right, but we also have a Bernie Sanders, a serious contender who he will certainly pose a serious candidacy in 2020. Israel has no left, and Israel has no center. Israel has a right, an alt-right, and a more alt-right. And obviously, in the so-called Western democracies, that's just not going to fly with large numbers of people, in particular, the typical constituencies of supporting that Jews support, and they have supported Jews, namely the liberal leftist constituencies. And so Israel's public relations now it's a disaster in those constituencies. The left, the so-called soft left liberal precincts of Western society. And so the campaigns have now become continuous, no longer continual. But in addition, there's a new phenomenon in the case of the UK. And the new phenomenon is, it used to be pretty much confined to the Jewish organizations defending Israel, acting essentially as agents of a foreign government. And we're allowed to say that. And we shouldn't be afraid to say that. I grew up in an era where constantly the Communist Party was accused of being an agent of a foreign government, getting its orders from Moscow and getting its orders from the Soviet embassy. And never did anyone say that was anti-Slav. You know, actually, as a factual matter, it was mostly true. They were getting their marching orders from Moscow or from the Soviet embassy. And you're allowed to say the same thing about these Jewish organizations. They're acting at the behest of their holy state. For the communists, it was the holy state in Moscow, and the holy state of Russia, headquarters Moscow. And you're allowed to say the same thing. That's not anti-Semitic. What the counselor who was expelled yesterday, what she said, that they're acting as agents of foreign country, that's just, you can argue it, another side has the right to adduce evidence disputing it. But certainly that's not an anti-Semitic statement. It's a factual one, to my mind. And I think it's a perfectly plausible, credible statement to say they get their marching orders from Israel or from the Israeli embassy in London. Now, but as I said, the interesting phenomenon, which makes the UK example very unique, but also it's an augur of what's going to happen in the US. The British elites suddenly discovered we can use the anti-Semitism card in order to try to stifle genuine insurgencies among the leftist insurgencies among the population. And so what used to be a kind of sectarian issue waged by Jewish organizations faithful to the party line emanating from Israel versus critics of Israel, now it's actually no longer sectarian. It's the whole British elite has decided they're going to use this anti-Semitism card to stop Jeremy Corbyn and the political insurgency he represents. That's new. And it's a breathtaking sight to behold, because you see from The Guardian to the Daily Mail,
All right.
and everything in between.
Yeah.
They're all united in this hysteria, this completely contrived, fabricated hysteria. It has as much basis in the real world as the Salem witch hunts in the United States. There's nothing there. Now, I don't mean that hyperbole. There is, or poetically, there is nothing there. If the best you can come up with is Tony Greenstein, and her name just eludes me.
Who himself is Jewish, I think.
Yeah, and what's her name? The one who.
Oh, Naz Shah.
No. The woman who did the production, the lynching.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, of course, you know. Her name just slips my mind. She's half Jewish, half African American.
Oh,
Uh,
drawing blank.
that's strange. 1 second. Give me one moment. Here.
Okay.
She just did this one-woman show. She was expelled because she's. 1 second. Jackie Walker.
Okay.
You know,
Well, I don't live in the UK anymore, but that's enough.
If that's the best you can come up with, that's very thin gruel. You know, it's pathetic. It's all complete. It's actually, I can't quite, except when you take the classic examples, the anti-communist hysteria, the Salem witch hunt hysteria, you really can't come up with parallels. You have to bear in mind, this has been going on for how many years now? It's been going on for like 2 years, nonstop. Every day, another poll. Every day, we have to parse the results of another poll. Thank God I don't have to do it because there's a brilliant young um, academic and activist, Jamie Stern-Weiner in the UK, who parses the numbers with one of his colleagues every day. But it's amazing. The problem is, even when you win, you lose. What do I mean by that? Because even if Jamie, his colleague, or my other young friend in the UK, Deborah McCoby, even if they can prove everything is a lie, first of all, there's always the assumption where there's smoke, there must be fire. So even if you prove it's a lie, but that's not the bigger problem. The bigger problem is it's sucking so much energy from the Jeremy Corbyn campaign that he can't talk about his platform. He has no time anymore to talk about his platform. All the headlines are about the anti-Semitism. Imagine if that happened to Bernie Sanders. You live in the United States. You realize the whole appeal of Bernie Sanders is his platform.
Of course.
It's talking about healthcare. It's talking about student debt. It's talking about the 1%. That's his whole appeal. Imagine what would happen to Bernie's campaign if he had to spend 24/7, 365 for years now
Yeah.
just talking about anti-Semitism. So even if you prove every charge is false, you still lose because you lost all the time that could have been invested in putting forth that platform before a broad public. That's why I've said from the beginning, you go back to look at my first comments. I said what Corbyn is and his inner circle doing is completely crazy. What are you doing?
Right.
You should just say, number one, this whole thing is fabricated. Number two, if there's any claims that you wish to make, we have a grievance procedure. We have now refined the grievance procedure. Henceforth, if you have a claim, bring it to the grievance procedure. I'm not commenting on it anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you bring this up because it brings me up to one of the next questions which I was going to ask, which is, what tactics on the part of Corbyn and his team do you think would be most effective to combat the smear campaign?
Well, he committed two fatal errors because both fatal errors are based on a completely uh, groundless assumption. The assumption was that there was a rational basis to these complaints. There's no rational basis to these complaints. These complaints are being fabricated and contrived in order to derail the Corbyn candidacy on the narrow grounds because Israel doesn't want Corbyn in power, and on the broader grounds that the whole ruling British elite doesn't want Corbyn in power. Anti-Semitism is just a contrivance. It's been instrumentalized as a weapon by the forces that feel threatened by Corbyn's views on Israel in particular, but the whole system, the whole rotten system in general. That was the false assumption. Based on that false assumption, they took it seriously, unfortunately. They assumed maybe for the sake of argument or public argument, that the anti-Corbyn juggernaut was acting in good faith. And so they did two things. Number one, they adopted this completely idiotic International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism, which was clearly just designed to stifle criticism of Israel. That was a fatal mistake. I said from the day one, this is a disaster once you adopt that, because now it's going to be used as it is now being used to purge everybody who says anything about Israel, critical of Israel. Second fatal mistake was not to end the discussion. They could simply have said, we don't think this campaign is being waged in good faith. There is another agenda. It's a political agenda that has nothing whatever to do with anti-Semitism. However, we recognize that our party, like any party, is going to have some people who probably don't belong there. And therefore, we have a grievance procedure. It's been criticized. I don't know how valid the criticism has been, but at this point, it has been refined. If you have a grievance, send it to the grievance procedure, and we proceed from there. Now, those are the two. One second. Hello? Those are the two, uh, I would call them minor errors. The major error, which has been a complete and total disaster, has been the abdication by the Labor Party of the radical tradition, but also liberal tradition, which asserts the absolute value of liberty of speech. As John Stuart Mill famously put it, in the opinion not of bad men, but the best of men, nothing which is contrary to truth is useful. Truth is an absolute value, and liberty of speech is the only means available to fallible human creatures to acquire truth. The as Bill said, the only way you can be certain of your belief, and now I'm quoting him, is a standing invitation to the world to prove you wrong. If you don't give that invitation to the world to prove you wrong, you can never know whether what you believe is true actually is true. The Labor Party, in the midst of this hysteria, has completely, totally, catastrophically abandoned that tradition and has turned into a thought police, expelling members for incorrect thoughts and trawling the web for any hint of a thought that might be politically awry. So much so, it's very interesting to watch thoughts by, let's say, the CST, the Community Service Trust, the Jewish organization. They now classify thoughts. Some person posted something on the web. A thought is now classified as an anti-Semitic incident. How can a thought be an incident?
All right.
The most fundamental distinction, as every civil libertarian will tell you, is the distinction between thought and conduct. We all recognize the two are different. You can go out in London and hand out leaflets advocating public fornication between men and goats. And nobody's going to dispute your right to distribute such a leaflet, correct?
Wow.
to
Please stay.
distribute such a leaflet. But obviously, totally different questions arise if a person chooses on the street to fornicate with a goat. It doesn't take several degrees in philosophy to recognize that at the most basic level, I recognize there are gray areas, but at the most basic level, there's a distinction between thought and conduct. And now, in the insanity that's seized control of the Labor Party, insanity induced by this criminal cabal trying to oust the democratically elected head of the Labor Party, they now classify thoughts as incidents.
Unbelievable.
You're not allowed to think.
This is this. Go ahead.
Thoughts anymore in the Labor Party. Everybody's terrorized now of what they post on the social media because it may be construed as an anti-Semitic incident that will get you expelled from the Labor Party. It's really quite. I want to add here, incidentally, because you live in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
That's unthinkable here.
Yeah, well,
Has anybody said that Ilhan Omar should be expelled from the Democratic Party?
no, but remember in the United States you have the First Amendment.
I know, but the Labor Party, and remember, the Labor Party is a left party. And there's a very rich tradition going back to Marx of the importance of liberty of speech. Gramsci, the truth is revolutionary. You know, those are precepts a lot of us grew up with. And now we're seeing the whole thing, that whole tradition being sabotaged and destroyed by this criminal cabal, this criminal juggernaut that's trying to oust the democratically elected leader of the Labor Party.
Okay, this is a good segue to my next question, which is what do you think progressive activists, journalists, scholars can do to counter the claims of the smear campaign?
There are three things. Number one, there should be a small group of competent people, small people like Jamie Stern Weiner, Deborah Maccabee, who will just answer the claims. Now, I emphasize small. You need 2 or 3 people handling this. It cannot consume the already limited resources of the Labor Party. The party has to be organizing in preparation for a possible election, and it should be building its ranks, reaching out. Its program. That's what the party does. It can't allow itself to be sucked in to the point of extinguishing its resources on this lunacy. But there has to be, a competent unit, a few people who can answer the charges. Number 2, say it's over. We're not answering as a party any longer any of these charges. If you go on a program and they ask you, You say we have a unit that's responding in detail. We have a grievance procedure against any party members. We are not proceeding anymore. It's over. You have to be firm. It's over, folks. The show is over. The farce is finished.
Yeah, next question.
Next question, and if you don't have a next question, nice knowing you.
Mm.
And number 3, in my opinion, the most important, you have to revitalize, resurrect that tradition of free speech and to tell your members, don't be afraid to speak in our party. As the German folk song says, die Gedanken sind frei. Thoughts are free. Nobody in our party is going to be penalized for thoughts. The only penalty that can be inflicted on somebody for a thought is other party members have the right to say, well, you know what? I really don't like that idea, and I don't like the fact that you're saying it, so I don't think we're going to be friends anymore. You know? You have the right to say that. I've had friends who I found some of their views just so unacceptable that I had to terminate the friendship. But the party is not going to expel you. You know why? Because there are a lot of thoughts of a lot of people which I didn't like in my youth. And you know what? They turned out to be right and I turned out to be wrong. So you don't expel them. Because for all you know, and for all I know, because none of us is infallible, we might be wrong. When Mill in On Liberty, when he criticizes what he calls the presumption of infallibility, that is to say, people saying, well, I know that's not true. And Mill says, well, how could you know for sure? You're human, you're fallible. There are 10,000 things that humanity knew for sure was not true and turned out to be true. I mean, the most obvious one was, it was obvious the world was flat. You just saw the horizon. It's obviously flat.
Yeah.
Well, that proved to be obviously wrong.
Mm.
But what Mill said was, the presumption of infallibility is when you decide questions for others. And he put for others in italics.
Mm-hmm.
You have the right to be 100% sure that you think what you're saying is right. You know, nobody can deny it. I don't think it's wise, but you have the right. But what you don't have the right to do is to silence those who disagree with you, because you might be wrong. And so the Labor Party needs to send a message in clear, unequivocal terms. There will be no suspensions, let alone expulsions, for thoughts in the Labor Party. Thoughts are free. Die Gedanken sind frei.
Yeah.
I personally make only one exception to that rule. And it's not a hypocritical exception. It's a consistent exception. Certain words do not contain any intellectual content. If I were to say, you fucking nigger, you fucking cunt, you fucking kike, that's not a thought.
Right. It's an insult.
It's a verbal club.
Right.
A way to smash your skull with words. I recognize that those words, epithets, only epithets, don't you can penalize a person for that because they do not contribute to the pursuit of truth.
Mm.
However, the moment you state something that has any intellectual content, even if it's something like Jews are cheap or women are not good at math or black people are intellectually inferior, those have intellectual content. You may not like the content, you may be appalled by the content, but they have content. You have the right to say it.
Yeah.
Now, Mill says, I have the right to boycott you. So I don't want to hang around a guy like that. He's just like such a negative force, such a force of negativity. I don't really want. Yeah, you have the right to do that.
Mm.
You don't have the right to stifle them, to repress them, to suppress them. No, you don't have that right. Sorry, you don't. You don't have that right because you're a Labor Party. You're part of that tradition that believes in truth. You want to carve out a rational future based on what the reality is.
Right.
And the only way you can carve out that future is if you allow people to think freely.
Yeah.
That to me, number one, you establish a small unit which can just answer the charges, crunch the data, parse the argument. Number two, you declare it's over.
Mm.
You have any questions about the data? Go to our clarification unit. You have any questions about a member of the Labor Party, somebody who, let's say, has been stalking Jews and in Orthodox Jews in London? Yeah, that could be a grounds, I think.
Mm.
So that to me is legitimate. So go to our grievance procedure and we'll look into it. We'll investigate. You should actually go to the police, but you can also go to our grievance procedure. And point three, for the Labor Party to make a very clear, unequivocal announcement. We made a mistake. We traveled down, we traversed the wrong path. We're going back. We're going back to the rich tradition that says nothing which is contrary to truth is useful, that says the only way you can know truth is a standing invitation to the world to prove you wrong. And so we are lifting all and any constraints on liberty of speech in our party. There will be no limits whatsoever, except for that minor, as I say, pretty marginal exception,
Mm.
college classroom. If there's a debate over, say, the genetic basis, is there a racial genetic basis for intelligence? You're allowed to have that debate. But a teacher is not allowed to say, shut up, you dumb nigger.
Right.
That's the only exception I would make, because as I said, it has no intellectual content. It's just a verbal club aimed at the skull of somebody. But other than that, thoughts are free, because you're destroying the Labor Party now.
This is another good segue, if I may, to my next question, which is how optimistic or pessimistic are you about how things are going to pan out moving forward?
I'm not optimistic now.
You're not.
No, because the purges continue on a daily basis, the suspensions, the expulsions, and I have to say, I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, but I'm beginning to wonder whether there are people in Corbyn's inner circle who want to take him down. Because how can you not see this is all being done in bad faith? How can you not see you can't placate these people? How can you not see that you can't appease these people? This has been going on for 2 years already.
Mm.
This is the second full summer, a whole freaking summer of this. How can you not see what's going on?
Right.
So I have to think they do see some of them, but they see it as a way of getting rid of Corbyn because they think in their minds, like in the US, they think a nice non-controversial candidate like Biden can bring down Trump.
Yeah.
But Bernie, they say, I don't believe it, by the way. Trump will destroy Biden. Will destroy Biden. The only one Trump will have a very hard time with is Bernie. The debate would be hilarious. If you could imagine debates between Trump and Bernie, it would be very, very funny. I think Bernie would totally destroy him.
Oh, it wouldn't be close.
Yes, it wouldn't be close. Bernie's the only one, the last debate, he said, I took 10 people across the bridge from the US to Canada. They had diabetes. They need insulin. Insulin was 10 times less. It cost 10 times less in Canada and the United States. And he said, you know why? Because they're all a bunch of crooks.
Right.
Nobody's a bunch of crooks.
Well, to me, the fact that the Democrats picked Hillary Clinton is why Trump won, because he very successfully and rightly pointed out that they represent the Washington status quo, the corruption, Clinton Foundation.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, my view is if we're not going to have Bernie or Corbyn, what's the point of having two parties? Just give the Republicans and the conservatives the keys to the countries and say, run it as you see fit.
Look, Trump has been a menace, and he's done a lot of damage. We have to be honest about that. But there's no way in the current political climate that anybody except Bernie can beat Trump. It's not going to happen. But in the UK, I get the feeling, because the Tories are in such disarray, that people think maybe, even in his inner circle, think maybe we get somebody less, radical.
Right.
We can take power. So I have to think that they're part of the sabotage is from within, even his inner circle. Otherwise, it makes no sense to me. I'm reading each day, Jamie or Deborah send me a new announcement. Yesterday, a Labour Party member was expelled. Today, another one was suspended. How could you possibly believe at this point that this is going to appease the other side?
Right.
It's probably crazy. So I have to believe they're not crazy, that they're people who are actually in his inner circle thinking, well, the Tories are in such disarray. If we can get somebody a little more mild, we can get power.